All right, I got time for a short one. Got a little break here. Let's knock out a podcast. I know I'm not paying a lot of attention and spending a lot of time on these, but at least we're getting these stories cranked out, and that's the most important thing. So let's get rolling with this short video. All right, here we go. I have two teenage grandsons, and they were here this past weekend. We spent all day Sunday fishing. We came in and they were dirty. I sent them both to the shower. What's funny is 2 years ago, I'd have to put them in a half Nelson to get them to take a shower. But they both went and took a shower, came out. Papa, this soap that you've got in here is awesome. What is it? Y'all, I'm not lying. I'm not just making this up. They both came in and said it. And I said, that's my Yeti bar soap. Matter of fact, that's the dixiecryptid bar. It's a lightly patchouli scented soap. It's a real manly, woodsy scent. And they loved it. I had just got an order in, so I gave them both a bar to take home, and their parents even like it. Yeti bars, soaps are unsurpassed in quality. The bars are bigger, the bars are less expensive, and you will not be disappointed in the product that you buy. Use the code DC10 at checkout and get a 10% discount off your purchase. YetiBars.net and Yeti Bars on Facebook. Check them out. This story is from a woman who does not necessarily give me permission to say her name, so I'm not going to, but when she hears it, she'll know it's hers. And she writes, I've lived in North Alabama all my life. I've seen a lot of things there that I can't explain. But the most haunting thing of all was something I didn't actually see. It happened in the fall of 2016. I had recently divorced and I was staying at my sister's home on a mountain in rural Morgan County. With the weight of my divorce on my mind and the uncertain future before me, I was struggling to sleep one night, so I gave up and went outside at 3:30 a.m. It was peaceful out there with the insects singing and the breeze blowing the leaves around. I sat there on the back deck watching the stars, praying about my situation and letting the night wash over me. There's something calming about the sound of insects singing in unison with the tree frogs while the wind blows a gentle breeze through the trees at night. I had been out there for about 30 minutes when it happened. Everything went silent. No more insects, no more tree frogs, nothing. From the holler next to my sister's house came a sound that took my breath away and paralyzed me. It was a long sound and it was loud. It echoed off the trees in front of me. I had never heard this sound before in nature. It was a growly, distressful, hurting, even a lonely sound. I sat there frozen, trying to breathe. Finally, I stood up and I looked around. That was when the smell hit me. It was a musty, dirty, nasty odor that I can't fully describe. By this time, I was shaking all over. Slowly, I walked backwards into the back door because I knew it was close. There was no moon that night, and I hadn't turned any of the outdoor lights on, so I didn't see anything. I didn't want to. I got in the house and locked the door, and I jumped into bed. I didn't tell anyone about this for about a week. I was trying to process what had happened. I realized I had heard the sound somewhere before, in Bigfoot documentaries. When I finally did start talking about it, my family thought I was crazy. My friends think so too, but it was real. Never have I ever smelled that scent or heard that sound before since that night. That sound and that smell still haunt me to this day. It doesn't matter to me what they think. It's my story and I'm sticking to it. And thanks for reading it. Well, man, thanks for sending it. That's a great story. Is that any different than a full-on visual? Probably a little bit, but there's no doubt that you were encountering something, what's the word? Menacing in the woods that night. And you knew, your instincts knew what it was, and you went inside. I think that was a good move. But that's a great story, and I really appreciate her sending it. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, this last story is kind of long, I was going to do short stories, but this one's pretty good, so hang on to your weave. The writer doesn't want to be identified, and so here's what he writes. I would prefer to remain anonymous. I've tried to talk Bigfoot with several people, but the response is always met with ridicule. That being said, I'm happy to share my story with you. I know that you enjoy short stories and actual encounters of different kinds. My story is actually 3 stories that tie together, in that they all happened in the same small area. I grew up on a farm in south central Alabama. Not only was I a farm boy, but I was and still am an avid outdoorsman. Growing up in the country, I have seen and heard just about everything you can think of in nature. This is important later in my 3 stories. My first story is one I often think about, even in my adult years. I was 7 years old when I saw something that shook me to the core. I grew up in a time when there were no TV remotes. So for my parents, primarily my dad, I was the remote. He would call me from playing in my room to come in the living room and say, "Son, change the channel." One night, well after dark, maybe around 8 p.m., he called me to change the channel. I left my room and went to the living room, changed the channel, and eagerly walked back to my room, thinking only of returning to my toys. As I turned to walk through the bedroom door, I froze. Directly across the room was the only window. And standing in that window, staring directly at me, was a monster. I couldn't make out a face, but I saw the outline of a head that had to be covered with fur because it was shaggy. That thing really scared me. What still stays with me today are those red eyes. They weren't glowing or anything crazy, but they stood out to me like hot coals in the pitch black of its face. I only saw it for a few seconds. I know the entire episode lasted about 10 seconds, but it felt like 10 minutes. It was like I was in slow motion. I let out a shriek and I ran to the living room where my parents were, and I told them there was a monster looking in my window. They told me it was just my imagination and to go back to my room. After a few minutes, I grudgingly obeyed. I got to the door and slowly peeked my head around the door frame. I looked right back at the window and I saw nothing. Whatever it was gone. About this time, my mom walked up and said, "See, it was just your imagination." To this day, I do not know if it was just me being a little boy or if I really saw something. Bigfoot wasn't even on my mind. I saw Harry and the Hendersons in Boggy Creek a few weeks later, but I never thought about the creature portrayed in those films when reflecting on my experience. It wasn't until I started, just for fun, listening to other accounts people were sharing about their encounters that I made the connection. Some of them described those same red eyes I believe I saw that night. I should also mention that I'm now 6 feet tall. The bottom of that window is level with the top of my head. I have to stand on my tiptoes to peek in over the windowsill. The eyes that I saw were easily 2 feet higher. That thing would have had to have been 8 feet tall to be looking in my window where those eyes were. My second story happens on the same property about 12 years later. My father raised beef cattle. My father was a real salt-of-the-earth type who loved to be outside and working. He really enjoyed getting his hands dirty, working on tractors and fixing farm equipment, or working with his cattle. He enjoyed the work, but he hated double working. He always said, "Make your licks count." Because of this, he liked to work smart. One thing he did was feed his cows every day. This brought them up to him where he could count them and inspect them. It had the added benefit of making them gentle to work with as well. You could walk right up to most any of them and pet them. At this point in time, he had cut back his herd to about 20 or so head and their calves. Dad did that so he could keep them right near the house and not have to keep them in multiple pastures. Dad also had about 5 good-looking heifers in the side pasture that he was raising for sale. They were super gentle and growing into some fine-looking girls that would bring top dollar at the sales. The side pasture and the back pasture were divided by a fence that goes all the way to the back property line. The area was wooded, and the cows liked to go back there to the cool shade. One Saturday, about mid-morning, my father walked out to do some farm work and he heard a commotion. He looked up and he saw his heifers running as hard as they could towards the house. They were running so hard they couldn't stop and ran into the barbed wire fence. They hit the fence with such force that they almost tore it down. Dad calmed them down and gave them some feed. This seemed to relax them, but he knew something had scared them pretty badly to try to run through a 5-strand barbed wire fence. A year earlier, a pack of wild dogs had gone after the herd. This upset them as much as they were now. So in Dad's mind, those dogs were back. He grabbed his 12-gauge pump and a box of number 1 buckshot as he headed out to the pasture to check the rest of the cows. He looked all over the pasture and he saw nothing. He began to get fearful that they may have actually been stolen or gotten loose. He eventually went to the only place he hadn't checked, which was at the far corner of the pasture. It was the furthest point they could get from where the side pasture shared the corner with the main pasture. He went to the small pond in the corner. Behind the pond, he saw all of his cows circled up with the calves in the middle. They were obviously scared. Dad told me it was something like you would see on the Discovery Channel in Africa when predators attack water buffalo. They circle their young in the same fashion. They were so upset that when Dad tried to call them to the barn with feed, they wouldn't move. Dad patrolled the fence line all around his property and he saw nothing. He never saw, heard, or smelled anything out of the ordinary. He was frustrated that something had obviously terrified and stressed his herd this badly. He felt very strongly that whatever it was, it came from the back corner the heifers had come running from. The only thing over that way was a good friend and a neighbor of ours. His house was about a quarter mile through the woods and he owned no dogs or anything that would upset the cattle. The next day was Sunday. After we got home from church, Dad told me what happened. He asked me to grab my gun and go with him to patrol the woods, which we knew well. He wanted us to walk around our property and look for signs of anything. I believe he wanted me to go for 2 reasons. First, a second pair of eyes is always helpful to see what you may have missed. And second, I believe he was a little nervous himself. I agreed and grabbed my shotgun and some buckshot. We walked the property for a couple of hours and never found anything. Meanwhile, the entire herd was still nervous and even skittish of us, which never happened. After a couple of days, the herd calmed down and resumed normal behavior. It was a week later at church when Dad asked our neighbor if he had seen or heard anything weird the previous weekend. He said he hadn't, but he had an unusual photo on his game camera. Dad asked where it was located, and it turned out that it was only about 100 yards from the back corner of his fence, the same area from where the frightened cows had come running. I saw the picture. It was not impressive. At the very edge of the frame, the camera caught something large and hairy, but that was all. There was no definitive shape of a figure, just big and hairy. This didn't prove anything. It certainly didn't give Dad what he was looking for to bring closure to the event. Finally, he told me that he believed there was a large predator, like a mountain lion, that was passing through the area, and that was what scared the cows. The truth is, I don't know what scared the cows, but it made me think back to those red eyes looking through my bedroom window that night long ago. My final story happened when I was 33. I was married by that time with a couple of beautiful children and a little house dog. We lived about a 3-minute drive from where I grew up. I could walk to my parents' home in just a few minutes. I had developed a bad habit of staying up until 11 or 12 at night watching TV after my family had gone to sleep. I always took our dog out before going to bed, though. I'd grab a big mag light and walk around with my dog in the field we had next to the house. I kept it mowed low because my kids loved playing out there. Across the road from us was a block of grown-up brush and timber. Years earlier, the power company cut it all down and put in a new power line. 20 years later, it was now grown into one of the most thickest and nastiest thickets of timber you could imagine. It wasn't uncommon to hear a pack of coyotes out there. Because of them, I kept a pistol in my pocket while I watched my little dog, just in case they decided to make a run at our beloved family pet. It was early spring, so there wasn't a lot of vegetation. This allowed sound to carry a long way through the woods in the cool night air. One night, I heard a coyote howl. It was kind of strange. I remember thinking, that coyote sounds hoarse. The howl was deeper than I'm used to hearing from coyotes. It also didn't trail off in the same way that normal coyotes howl. Instantly, 2 separate packs of coyotes went crazy. One pack was behind my property, and the second was on my neighbor's property to my left. After everything settled down, I heard knocking. It sounded like someone driving nails into a fence post. It was exactly 5 knocks, and then after a few minutes, 5 knocks again. This happened 4 times before my dog finished her business and was ready to go in for the night. I didn't think much of it, but this same howl continued for about a week. It would get a response from the coyotes each time, although they would always be in a different location, sometimes closer, sometimes further away. The knocking continued as well, always between 11 p.m. and midnight. One night I went to bed early and heard it through my window. The knocking always followed the howl. I never saw anything, and after a week, it stopped. There were no knocks and no howls. I tried to explain it to myself like this. The hoarse howl was just an old alpha male coyote. That is why other coyotes always answered him. But I didn't understand why he would always call from the same place. I also said the knocking was just a farmer working on his property on the other side of the thicket. But at 11:30 or midnight, it just didn't make sense, and I thought with the knocking maybe it was a Bigfoot. I did a little research and found out that there's a correlation between Bigfoot howls and coyotes answering them. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. You'll have to be the judge. And that's the end of the email. That's 3 separate, really interesting, I guess you'd call them encounters. I don't know. But it's evidence that anybody would say, if it happened to you, if these kind of things happen to you, the next day you'd go into work or you'd call a girlfriend or a friend, depending on if you're a man or woman, and you would say, hey, man, the weirdest thing happened last week, and you would tell people about it, and most people would go, who knows? But people who kind of follow these stories and are interested in this topic, they're always going to think that's probably a Bigfoot. Who knows what this is, but it sounds very compelling to me. But this was a really good email, and it was longer than I thought it would be, but once I got started, I couldn't stop reading it. So, all right, well, that'll wind it up, and thank you to the writer for sending that. I really appreciate it. All right, that will conclude this short video, which really wound up not being so short at all. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join me on the next video. I really appreciate all of you, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Thanks.